Welcome to Cyberside Chats. My name is Sherry Davidoff, and I'm the founder of LMG Security.
And I am Matt Duran, the Director of Training and Research for LMG Security.
And today we're going to talk to you about the OPM email server scandal. Is this a cybersecurity disaster in the making?
It very well might be.
I think it might already be here. So let's talk about this. Many of you may remember the OPM hack of 2015. And it turns out history might be repeating itself, but only worse this time. So what is the Office of Personnel Management?
Well, the Office of Personnel Management is a federal agency that basically maintains information on not just the current employees of the federal government, but pretty much anyone who's applied to work for the federal government. You mentioned the 2015 hack of the OPM. That was perpetrated allegedly by a Chinese nation-state group. They were able to infiltrate that server. They were able to drop in the PlugX malware and start siphoning data out of those servers. I was actually involved in that particular data breach, which was a little concerning at the time. But
well, and I know they stole not just current employees' information, because you were not employed at the OPM.
No, I was not.
No, it was everybody that had ever applied for a government job. You were looking for an internship, right?
Yeah.
So there you are, poor 20-something-year-old Matt, I assume, and boom, all of a sudden your information is out there and you're at risk of identity theft for like the rest of your life.
Yeah,
right?
yeah, at the very least.
Yeah, so there were actually way more people's data stolen than had actually been employed at the agency or within the government. So today, we're going to talk about how this rogue email server installed at OPM now could potentially put millions of people at risk. So let's learn what happened, why it's dangerous, and what all of us cybersecurity leaders can learn from this disaster.
Yeah, let's get into it.
Okay. Well, on Tuesday, February 4th of last week, 2 women filed an emergency motion for a temporary restraining order. They said that they faced immediate, ongoing, and irreparable injury as a result of these violations of law, the server that they claimed is illegally installed at OPM. So how does an email server link to irreparable injury? Well, fortunately, you've already brought up the 2015 hack. It turns out that between 2012 and 2015, nation-state actors broke into OPM and started siphoning out sensitive information, including 22 million people's personnel records, background checks, 5 million fingerprints, financial histories, medical records, family details, and more. And what kind of data did they get on you, Matt?
Yeah, name, address, social security number, background check information.
Background check.
I don't know if they got my biometrics or not, but I mean, they very well could have. But I mean, that's a lot of information that you don't want getting out. I mean, I suppose because it was a nation state and because I was just applying for an internship, the risk to me at that point was fairly low. But that was not the case for everyone whose information was stolen.
No, there were some life or death impacts, actually. But one of the impacts that's been talked about is that China likely used the data to identify U.S. intelligence agents who were then detained and in some cases possibly executed. Yeah. So literally, a hack has led to death, most likely. Also, foreign adversaries were able to gain deep insights on the people that work for the U.S. government, making them potential targets. They know who has security clearances, who has issues in their background checks, they have their fingerprints, things like that. And then again, there's that threat of there's a long-term threat of identity theft. So anybody caught up in this may be at an increased risk of fraud really for the rest of their lives. Very hard to change your social security number. I don't know if you've ever tried it. It's just like not a thing.
Most people just, don't do that.
It's not centralized enough. So in this case, once that happened to OPM back in 2015, they really took a step back, assessed what had gone wrong, and figured out there were multiple factors. Number one, they had not deployed multi-factor authentication. It was a contractor's credentials that were stolen.
Yep.
And they installed what kind of malware?
PlugX malware.
Wow. Didn't we just talk about that?
We did. Yeah, if you go back and check out our podcast on when the FBI becomes your IT department, we talk about that malware specifically.
Yeah, funny. History just keeps repeating itself over and over. But ultimately, what I thought was the most interesting was they called attention to the lack of leadership. OPM did not have an effective managerial structure, they said, to implement reliable IT security policies, and they didn't comply with the agency's IT security program. So they had an IT security program, but it's not enough to have one on paper. You need strong leadership that is educated and knows how to enforce that and can connect the dots within the organization.
Yeah, you really do need somebody driving the car, so to speak.
Somebody who knows what they're doing. Honestly, I think pretty much all technical security problems are people problems. often when I consult, I think of myself as an organizational therapist. If you're missing patches, it's probably a people problem, things like that.
Yeah, well,
Ultimately.
I mean, you're not wrong. And I mean, we've talked about this in webinars before. I mean, we did an entire webinar on the human firewall and how important it is to have things like leadership and training in your organization.
Yep, check that out on YouTube. Okay, so what the government ended up doing was, number one, at OPM, they hired a chief information security officer, something that we think is really critical. Check out our top security controls. Having security expert leadership is one of our top controls for 2025. And it was also a top control for the OPM. They also made sure that they established an agency-wide centralized IT security workforce, and then they started rolling out specific security controls and solutions like multi-factor authentication, continuous monitoring, data loss prevention systems, things that could specifically help to prevent these types of attacks from happening again. And they took a coordinated approach. So, all good, right?
Until recently.
Until last week. So what happened last week?
Yeah, so from what we know so far about this, and this is a very quickly developing story, from what we know, there was a mandate that was issued by the Department of Government Efficiency, headed by Elon Musk, who has made some pretty sweeping changes to a lot of different government agencies, including the Office of Personnel Management at this point.
Well, he wanted to send an email to everybody, to millions of people.
He wanted to email every federal government employee simultaneously.
And can you do that with Microsoft 365, which is what they were using?
You cannot. You are limited to 10,000 emails per day, and that's not going to get to 2 million people. So yeah,
they don't like limitations.
We don't. So they stood up a brand new mail server inside of the OPM, connected it to the network, and then started sending emails from that server with an OPM email address, which there's been some kind of some sour feelings about that as well. A lot of people are thinking that they're impersonating the OPM because they're not really the OPM.
But yeah, it's HR at OPM.gov, I think.
HR at OPM.gov. And they were sending out the resignation offer that I'm sure most of you probably heard about at this point, offering all 2 million government employees the option to resign, receive 8 months of severance pay, and just diminish the size of the federal workforce.
So they said, respond with resign if you want to take advantage of this offer. But now, ultimately, I believe there's been a hold on this. A judge has paused this until at least Monday, by the way.
Yeah,
by the time
recently.
you listen to this, we will know if it's still paused or it might be back in effect. But another issue is that this was set up so quickly that they left the distribution list public. People could see how to access this distribution list, and they had not configured it to block emails from external people. So lots of people were emailing millions of government employees.
Yeah, I mean, it's just one of those basic email security things that it does have to do with how fast they set the server up. I mean, this was breakneck speed, and if you read posts on Reddit and other things like that, I mean, there are people with screenshots of the emails they were getting, the conversations they were having about this happening. I mean, this is going to have an impact on government security moving forward, especially with a lot of the other changes that are being made right now.
Yep. And according to the Jane Doe emergency motion, where they're trying to get a temporary restraining order, one of the biggest issues here was that this server was installed without conducting a privacy impact assessment, a PIA. And that's actually a requirement. The E-Government Act of 2002 says that you need to conduct a PIA so that you can establish what information is going to be collected by the system, how it's going to be handled, and make sure you have proper security controls in place. So the idea is just to make sure that we've got our ducks in a row before we roll something out. So that wasn't done. And according to, again, the two women behind this lawsuit, that is illegal. So, and again, this server is placing government employees at risk.
Yeah.
So, what are some of our technical concerns here?
Well, I mean, if we're putting up an internet-facing system like an email server, that becomes a target for attackers. And we've seen in many, many cases, email servers being a point of entry and leading to a much larger hack. I mean, we just have to look back at Microsoft Exchange as the example of that to see tens of thousands of organizations all hacked because of their on-premise email server.
I had almost forgotten about that, but not quite. In this case, you also have software and hardware that hasn't been vetted, and so that increases the risk that there's a problem. Maybe it's a configuration flaw, maybe it's behind on patches, maybe there's malware or a backdoor installed by Chinese nation-state actors. How would you know? We might be living through 2015 all over again. So those concerns have been brought up.
Well, and by installing a custom server like this, you're also bypassing most of the built-in security controls that you get with a platform
Right.
like Microsoft 365, and those can be really important for making sure that things like encrypted email are in use, or that there's not personally identifiable information being sent in unencrypted format. Or I mean, there's a lot that benefits you when you set up through a secure system.
So anytime you get a new or unvetted device on the network, you really place yourself at elevated risk of things like malware,
Yeah.
backdoors, ransomware. So that would be one of my concerns if I was part of the IT team within OPM. You also have to think about the risk of data exfiltration and espionage, especially since, as you point out, Matt, this server is internet facing. We may not find out until much later if
Yeah.
there's a problem. To that point, is there monitoring and logging on this system? Is it part of the centralized monitoring system? We don't really know, and
Yeah,
I'm not
we
sure
have no
anybody
idea.
else does. And then finally, we have to think about the risks of phishing and credential theft.
Yeah, one of the kind of anecdotes we pulled off of social media is that a lot of people who received that hr@opm.gov email, that was not a distributor, that was not an email address they were used to seeing. So a lot of people did think it was a phishing attack, and it would make sense that masquerading as a government agency would be a successful way to phish a lot of people. So yeah, again, it's just one of those weird little like nuances to the story that makes this all just terrible.
So we can't control OPM, but we can control security for our own organization. So what can all of us as leaders learn from this? Number one, set clear standards for devices. Make sure that you know what those standards are. Before anything can be connected to the network, you want to make sure that it's secure and within your risk tolerance.
Hmm.
Number two, you also want to detect any rogue devices as soon as they get installed. And you can use things like network access control and real-time monitoring in order to find those and block them from connecting.
Yeah, those are really really important security controls to have on your network. You also need to make sure that you're educating leadership. We need to make sure that executives in not just government but all organizations understand why security does matter. There is a huge benefit to implementing a good security program. One, it keeps your data safe, and two, it can save you a ton of money if there is some kind of cybersecurity incident in your network. But if leadership doesn't understand why we do those things, then budgets get cut, corners get cut, and
Or they're going to install a
or
rogue
they
server and
install
say,
rogue
hey,
email
we need
servers.
this to
Yeah.
happen. Yeah, you really need your leadership to be aligned with the IT security team. So it's important.
Yeah.
Security starts from the top.
No, it really does. We also need to talk about email security just in
Yes.
general. A lot of people don't use secure features in their email, and that's really unfortunate. I mean, things like email signing, digital encryption, DKIM, DMARC records, so you prevent spoofing and you prevent phishing. I mean, these are all really important to have in place. And if you are just throwing up a random email server for the purpose of emailing every federal employee, there's a good chance you probably don't have those security features there.
Yep. You also want to make sure you're adopting the principles of zero trust. This is a really big
Yeah.
concept, but the idea is when it comes to IT deployments, you have no unapproved servers or access, and you want to verify everything. And how do you do that? Well, you want to make sure you're regularly conducting security audits. Actually, one of my very first jobs in security was auditing hundreds of Linux systems on a regular basis. And you'd be surprised about how much change happens. There's always this pop and crackle within IT. Things pop up, and it's always that system in the corner that no one detects that's going to be the first foothold into your organization. So regular security audits are key. So with that, history repeats itself unless we learn from it. So thank you so much for tuning in. Matt, thanks for the conversation.
Of course.
If this rogue server isn't shut down, millions of federal employees' private data could be at risk, so stay tuned. Let us know what you think. Share your thoughts in the comments or contact us directly on LinkedIn. And finally, like and subscribe to more Cyberside Chats. Thank you so much, and we'll see you next week.
Thanks, everyone.